My beloved child. Before you hear the rest of this message, hold your attention here for a moment, because what happened around your name was not ordinary, and the silence that followed was heavier than anyone in that room expected. A call came unexpectedly. No warning. No preparation. Just a sudden vibration, a screen lighting up, and a voice on the other side that changed the entire atmosphere around your soulmate in a single breath. Until that moment, everything around them was moving normally. Words were flowing, faces were calm, ordinary conversation was continuing like any other day. But the instant they looked at that screen, something shifted inside them so deeply that even they could not hide it. Their expression changed first. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough for anyone nearby to notice that their attention had completely left the room. Their eyes stopped moving the way they had been moving before. Their hands became still. Even the smallest habits they usually carry without thinking suddenly disappeared. And when they answered that call, something was said that reached directly into the place where your memory has been resting all this time. Don't skip. Because what happened next is the reason this moment matters more than you think. The voice on the other side did not simply mention ordinary things. It brought up something connected to you in a way your soulmate was not prepared for. A name, a memory, a sentence, a reminder, something they thought they had learned to control suddenly returned all at once. And the moment that happened, silence took over them so completely that even the people nearby began wondering why they had gone quiet. This was not casual silence. This was the kind of silence that appears when someone hears something they were emotionally unprepared to receive. They did not respond immediately. They listened. Their breathing slowed. Their eyes lowered. And while the person speaking continued talking, your soulmate felt an old feeling rise again, the kind they tried to push away many times, the kind that never fully leaves when someone truly matters. Stay till the end. Because something huge is waiting for you. The strange part is that the call did not last very long, but what it carried stayed long after it ended. Even after they lowered the phone, they remained still, almost as if their thoughts had become louder than the room around them. People near them may have spoken, but those words barely reached them. Their mind had already gone somewhere else. And that place was connected to you. There are moments when people pretend they are unaffected, but silence reveals what words hide. That silence was not emptiness. It was full of unfinished thoughts, unanswered emotions, memories they thought had settled but had not. One unexpected sentence reopened something. One mention connected them back to a feeling they had tried to organize, control, and place in a quiet corner of themselves. Yet suddenly, there it was again. Your presence returned inside their mind with such force that even they were surprised by how quickly everything inside shifted. For a few seconds, they did nothing. And those few seconds felt longer than anyone around them understood. Because when someone becomes silent after hearing something tied to one person, it usually means that person still carries unusual weight inside their heart. Do not look away now. Because the silence itself said more than any words they were willing to speak. They replayed the sentence again internally. Not once. More than once. Trying to understand why hearing that particular detail about you had such immediate power over them. Why after all this time, one unexpected connection to your name could still interrupt their emotional balance? That is when another thought entered. A thought they did not expect. A realization that maybe what they tried to ignore has not weakened at all. Maybe distance did not remove what they believed it removed. Maybe time changed many things, but not the place your memory still occupies. And this is why the silence deepened. Because some truths become impossible to deny when they arrive unexpectedly. If they had prepared themselves, perhaps they would have reacted differently. But this call gave no warning. It arrived suddenly, entered deeply, and left them unable to continue normally. Even after they returned the phone to their side, they did not immediately rejoin whatever was happening around them. Their attention remained somewhere else, somewhere private, where your name had already reopened a conversation inside them they were not ready to face. Don't skip. Because the strongest part has not even arrived yet. After those silent seconds, they looked away from everyone around them, not because they wanted distance from people, but because they needed distance from being observed. Some emotions are easier to manage when nobody watches. And in that private internal moment, something became clear. The call had reminded them that your impact did not disappear. It had simply gone quiet. And quiet things often return with greater force when least expected. They remembered details they had not planned to remember today. A voice. A moment. A sentence once spoken. A reaction. A look. A feeling they told themselves they had already understood. Yet suddenly all of it returned with unusual clarity. That is why their silence felt so intense. Because silence often appears when memory becomes stronger than control. And what no one around them understood was this: they were not silent because they had nothing to say. They were silent because too much arrived at once. Too much emotion. Too much realization. Too much connection. And somewhere inside that silence, one question began forming. Why now? Why did hearing this today create such a reaction? Why did one call shake something that had seemed calm? The answer is simple, though they may not fully admit it yet. Because certain bonds do not disappear just because life becomes busy. Certain names do not lose power just because time passes. Certain people remain emotionally present even when they are physically absent. And your presence still carries that kind of weight. Stay till the end. Because something huge is waiting for you. The room eventually moved again. Sound returned. Ordinary conversation continued. But your soulmate was no longer inside that ordinary moment the same way they had been before. Something had shifted permanently in those few minutes. And even though nobody else could fully understand it, they themselves knew something had awakened that could no longer be ignored so easily. Because after silence comes reflection. And reflection often leads people toward truths they tried not to examine. This was only the beginning of that process. The call ended. But what began inside them did not end. It stayed. It followed them. It continued quietly even while they pretended everything was normal. And the most surprising part is that later, when they were alone, the first thing that returned to their thoughts again was not the caller's voice. It was you. And that is why this moment matters more than it first appeared. Because some calls carry ordinary news. But some calls open hidden doors inside the heart. This one opened one they thought had already been closed. And now, even they are beginning to realize that silence was not weakness. It was the sound of something important returning. What happened after that silence became even more unexpected, because the moment your soulmate stepped away from everyone else, they did not return to what they were doing before. They carried that unfinished feeling with them like something suddenly too heavy to ignore, and even while trying to appear normal, their thoughts were already moving in one direction only. Toward you. The phone was no longer ringing. The call had ended. Yet the words from that brief conversation kept repeating inside their mind with unusual force, almost like each second was uncovering something they had hidden from themselves for longer than they realized. Don't skip. Because the next part explains why that silence became deeper than anyone around them understood. They looked at the screen again after the call, not because another message had arrived, but because sometimes people stare at a screen when they are trying to gather themselves before facing what they are truly feeling. And during that quiet pause, one thought arrived so clearly that it unsettled them. What if this is not over? That thought did not come lightly. It arrived because something in that call touched a place they had carefully kept guarded. Maybe it was the way your name was mentioned. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the sudden reminder that some connections refuse to fade even when people try to convince themselves otherwise. For a few moments, they stopped everything. No reply to anyone nearby. No new conversation. No distraction. Only that growing inner voice asking questions they were not prepared to answer. Why did hearing about you still feel this powerful? Why did one unexpected mention create such immediate emotion? Why did their chest feel heavier after only one short call? Stay till the end. Because something huge is waiting for you. The truth is, they expected themselves to move on from that moment quickly. They thought they could simply continue the day, return to routine, and let the feeling pass. But that did not happen. Instead, every ordinary sound around them began to feel distant. The room was active, but inside them there was another scene entirely, one built from memory, unfinished thoughts, and something they had not fully admitted even to themselves. Your soulmate remembered a detail connected to you that they had not thought about in a long time. A specific sentence. A moment of honesty. A look that once stayed in their mind longer than expected. And suddenly that detail returned so vividly that they had to sit down, because sometimes emotion arrives so quietly yet so strongly that even physical stillness becomes necessary. This is why silence after certain calls means more than words ever can. Because silence is often where truth begins speaking. And in that moment, one truth became impossible for them to deny. Your presence still changes something inside them. Not lightly. Not temporarily. But deeply enough that one unexpected reminder can interrupt their emotional balance completely. Don't skip. Because what they did next carried more meaning than anyone noticed. They opened old thoughts they had been avoiding. Not on purpose at first. But once memory begins moving, it rarely stops where people expect it to stop. They began asking themselves questions they had postponed many times. What would happen if your paths crossed again? What would they say if a conversation truly opened? Would everything feel different, or exactly as powerful as before? And the most surprising part was not the questions themselves. It was the fact that they were not pushing those questions away anymore. For the first time in a while, they allowed those thoughts to stay. That alone changed something. Because when someone stops resisting what they feel, clarity begins entering slowly. And clarity can lead people toward decisions they never expected to consider. Something huge is waiting for you. Because the energy of that moment did not disappear after 1 hour. It followed them even later, when the noise around them faded and they were left alone with no one to interrupt what was happening inside. That is when the silence became even more personal. They replayed the call from beginning to end. Not because it was long, but because every word now seemed to carry hidden weight. One sentence especially stayed with them. And that sentence connected directly to the possibility that what they assumed was settled may still be unfinished. That realization changed the atmosphere around them completely. Even their expression later reflected it. People may have noticed they were quieter than usual, slower to respond, more distant in ordinary conversation. But nobody understood the true reason. Because some emotional shifts happen privately before they ever become visible publicly. And yours began there. Stay till the end. Because this part matters deeply. At one point, they almost reached for the phone again. Not to answer anyone. Not because someone called. But because your name had become present enough in their thoughts that the distance between memory and action suddenly felt smaller than before. They paused. Their hand moved. Then stopped. That hesitation itself revealed everything. Because hesitation appears when someone wants to act but is still deciding how much truth they are ready to face. And right there, in that unfinished movement, something powerful became clear. You are not forgotten in the way they once tried to believe. You remain connected to a part of them that responds instantly when touched by the smallest reminder. This is why that phone call mattered. It was short outside. But inside, it opened a much longer conversation. A conversation they are still having with themselves even now. And what makes this moment extraordinary is that they did not expect today to become emotionally significant. Yet one ordinary ring changed the emotional direction of everything. That is how certain moments arrive, quietly, but with lasting force. And while they may still appear calm from the outside, inside there is movement. There is reflection. There is recognition. There is something unfinished becoming visible again. Don't skip. Because what comes next may explain why this silence was never ordinary at all. The most hidden truth is this. Sometimes the heart becomes quiet not because it has nothing left to feel, but because it suddenly feels too much to explain. And that is exactly where your soulmate now stands, inside a silence filled not with emptiness, but with meaning they are only beginning to understand. Long after that moment should have passed, your soulmate still could not fully return to normal, because some silences do not end when the room changes. They continue quietly inside, growing stronger each time a memory refuses to leave. The call had already ended, yet the meaning of it kept expanding. What seemed small at first became impossible to ignore. And the reason was simple: the more they thought about what they heard, the more clearly they understood that your name still carries unusual power in their world. Don't skip. Because something happened next that even they did not expect from themselves. Later, when everything became quieter and nobody was watching closely, they replayed not only the phone call but also everything connected to you that had once felt unfinished. It was not intentional at first. It began with one thought, then another, then suddenly an entire chain of memories returned with unusual clarity. A sentence you once said. A feeling they once tried to dismiss. A moment they thought had faded. But instead of fading, those memories now felt sharper than before, almost as if the call had unlocked a door they had kept closed without realizing how much was still behind it. They sat with that feeling longer than planned. And in that stillness, something surprising happened. They stopped arguing with their own heart. For a long time, they had tried to explain certain feelings logically, telling themselves that some emotions belong to the past, that some thoughts should remain quiet, that some names should not carry so much meaning after time has passed. But this time, after that call, logic did not win. The emotional truth became louder. Stay till the end. Because something huge is waiting for you. For the first time in a while, they admitted privately that hearing about you changed their entire mood in seconds. That admission may sound small, but inside them it felt enormous. Because once a person admits that one name still changes everything, they can no longer pretend that connection means little. And the silence that followed was not confusion anymore. It became recognition. Recognition that something remains unfinished. Recognition that distance has not erased what they thought distance would erase. Recognition that even one unexpected mention of you can interrupt every ordinary thought they were carrying before. They looked around, but even ordinary surroundings no longer felt ordinary. The day had divided itself into before that call and after that call. And after that call, everything carried a new emotional weight. Don't skip. Because the strongest realization came quietly. They began wondering why this happened today. Why now, when they had not expected any emotional shift? Why one small interruption suddenly created such depth? And the answer that slowly formed was something they could not easily escape. Because certain bonds do not disappear simply because they become silent. Silence is not always the end. Sometimes silence only hides what remains active underneath. That is why your soulmate became quieter. Not because nothing mattered, but because too much suddenly mattered again. And in that quiet moment, another thought appeared. What if the call came at exactly the right time to force honesty? That thought stayed longer than expected. Because sometimes life places one moment directly in front of someone when they have delayed facing what they truly feel. And this felt like one of those moments. Something huge is waiting for you. Because while they remained silent outwardly, inwardly they had already begun seeing you differently again, not as a distant thought, but as someone whose presence still changes emotional direction instantly. That realization created a softness they did not expect. Even their expression changed when nobody was looking. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to reveal that they were no longer emotionally untouched. They remembered details they thought they had forgotten. The exact tone of certain conversations. The way certain moments once felt. Even things they believed were buried now returned with surprising warmth. And what surprised them most was not that memory returned. It was how welcome that memory suddenly felt. Stay till the end. Because this next truth carries unusual weight. At one point they almost spoke your name aloud while alone. Not intentionally. It simply came close enough to the surface that they noticed how naturally it still exists inside them. That moment startled them. Because names only rise that naturally when the connection underneath remains alive. And right there, another truth appeared. This phone call did not create new emotion. It revealed what was already there. It uncovered something that had been waiting quietly. That is why they could not easily move past it. That is why silence stayed. That is why even later, when everything around them returned to normal, something inside them still had not. Don't skip. Because one hidden detail matters more than all the others. They now understand that this moment was not random. The timing, the silence, the memory, the emotional shift, none of it felt ordinary anymore. It felt like a turning point they were not prepared for. A small event outside. A deep awakening inside. And while they may still keep their thoughts private, inside they already know something changed. The